you either have to be blind or huffing some serious copium to not realize the GNOME Foundation is having some pretty big issues. Late 2023, Holly Milling was brought in as the new GNOME Foundation Executive Director, and then a few short months later, stepped down from the position, in her words, to pursue a PhD in psychology and dedicate myself to my own private practice. However, I have absolutely no doubt that the negative reception to her being in that position, and from what I can see, basically being thrown to the wolves with almost no public explanation for why she's in the position, why she was brought on, what she's here to do, why she might actually be qualified to actually do this, certainly didn't help the situation either. Then we had Sonny Peers being booted from the GNOME Foundation board with literally no explanation for why this happened, allowing just all manner of theories to run wild, even though he was a very well-liked member. Then there are the general issues with overspending and underdeveloping of new funding strategies. However, another thing that has led to a bit of internal drama, whilst publicly being seen as a relatively good thing, is GNOME recognized as a public interest infrastructure. So back in 2023, GNOME received a €1 million investment from the Sovereign Tech Fund, now part of the Sovereign Tech Agency, to work on accessibility, hardware support, free desktop APIs, quality assurance, and some nice systemd integration. Basically, to modernize the GNOME platform and move it in the direction that they deem as modernizing the platform. Now, this was initially being organized by Tobias Bernard and Sonny Peers, the same Sonny that got removed from the board. And now Tobias has released this blog post, Re-Decentralizing Development. This was already announced internally, but Tobias is stepping down from putting together the application for another round of STF funding. That does not mean, however, the funding is not going to happen. Ultimately, that is dependent upon the STF and whether they actually accept the application, but now Adrian Vovg is going to be doing the application himself, so direct all your queries over to him instead, and not Tobias. Also, everything being said in the blog post is relevant to the next round of funding. He will be sticking around for the current one, just so it's not being disrupted and causes even more of a mess. So, let's get started. In the context of the foundation issues we've had throughout the STF project, I've been thinking a lot about what structures are best suited for collectively funding and organizing development, especially in the context of a huge self-organized project like GNOME. There are a lot of aspects to this, e.g., I hadn't quite realized just how important having a motivated, talented organizer like Sonny is to successfully delivering a complex project. But the specific area I want to talk about here is how power and responsibilities should be split up between different entities across the community. Basically, the blog post is about what level of involvement should the GNOME Foundation actually have in the development of GNOME. Should it just be holding the trademark, being a place to talk about GNOME, and basically nothing else? Should it be directly employing developers to work on the GNOME codebase? Or should it be giving out grants to developers that work independently to work on GNOME? And is the GNOME Foundation the correct place if development is being done to house these developers? Also, this blog is just Tobias's opinion, the opinion of someone who's been around for a very long time, who's been on the board for quite a while now, and is generally a well-liked member, but this is not the opinion of the entire board. Now, the problem here isn't government, corporate, or big money involvement in the GNOME project. GNOME, since basically the very start, has had that. The project grew up during the dot-com bubble. Young readers may not remember this, but Linux was the AI of that era, and many of our structures date back to this time. That obviously doesn't mean that it is completely useless, but it does mean that it was being very hyped up and Linux was just being jammed into things. And a great example that came from this involvement is the Linux accessibility stack under X11. Most of this came from funding from Sun and various other companies back in the early 2000s. And whilst it's been improved a bit since then, it never really had the same level of development because there just wasn't the backing. as the funding dried up, it's pretty much just been left to rot. So now that we're moving into Wayland, all of that X11 stack has basically just been left to rot, and now we have a whole new accessibility problem. The Foundation was created in its early days as a neutral organization to hold resources that should not belong to any one of the companies involved, such as the trademark, donation money, or the development infrastructure. A lot of checks and balances were put in place to avoid one group taking over the Foundation or the Foundation itself overshadowing other players. For example, hiring developers via the Foundation was an explicit non-goal. Advisory board companies do not get a say in the project's technical direction. So if there is like, I don't know, let's say Meta was involved in it, they couldn't say, oh, GNOME has to be developed in the way that we want it. And there is a limit to how many employees of a single company can be on the board. In the same vein, you can't have every single board member being a Red Hat employee. The dot-com bubble burst and some of those early companies died, but there continued to be significant corporate investment, e.g. from enterprise desktop companies like Sun, and then later via companies from the mobile space during the hype cycles around netbooks, phones, and tablets around 2010. In 2025 though, the desktop just isn't really growing. Yes, there are more Linux desktop users, but most of those users are coming from Windows or coming from macOS. The desktop as a device class isn't really growing. Most of that growth is in the mobile space, and nowadays Android is very much its own thing. Yes, it is still related to Linux, but if Linux stopped existing, Android would be fine. Today, corporate involvement in GNOME is limited to a handful of companies with an enterprise desktop business, e.g. Red Hat, and consultancies who mostly do low-level embedded work, e.g. Agalia with browsers, or Centricular with GStreamer. If we talk about the KDE side, they have a lot of involvement from Valve, a couple of other companies, and that's pretty much it. But GNOME has the same problem that a lot of other really big projects have. They have a lot of developers who've been around for, 15, 20 years, and they have a lot of developers who've been around for maybe 2 or 3 years. But a bit in the center, that's where you start to have a lot of problems. Why is that? Well, the people who've been around for a very long time either just do it as volunteer work and are just happy doing so, or they got a job back when it was a lot easier to get a job in open source, and then they've managed to just keep that job for a very long time. And for the new developers, they're in high school, they're in college, they haven't gone and gotten a full-time job yet, and then when they try to do so, they realize there's just not really that much work in the open source space and have to cut back a bit, and maybe they will be around for a long time, but just not committing at the same level they did back when they first started. And whilst there is plenty of corporate investment in this space, the problem is there are very few job openings in the field. While I don't have firm numbers, my sense is the number of people in precarious situations like these has been going up since I got involved around 2015. The time when you could just get a job at Red Hat was already long gone when I joined, but for a while, e.g. Endless and Purism had quite a few people doing interesting stuff. In a sense, this lack of corporate interest is not unusual for user-facing free software. Maybe we're just reverting to the mean. Public infrastructure simply isn't commercially profitable. Many other projects, particularly ones without corporate use cases, e.g. Tor, have always been in this situation, and thus have always relied on grants and donations to fund their development. Others have newly moved in this direction in recent years with some success, e.g. Thunderbird. I would not call what Thunderbird has done some success. Whilst people have gotten annoyed with the constant asking every single update for donations, if you look at their numbers, it's clearly working still. I think what many of us in the community have wanted to see for a while is exactly what Tor, Thunderbird, Blender, et al. Are doing. Start doing development at the Foundation. Raise money for it via donations and grants, and grow the organization to pick up the slack from shrinking corporate involvement. This is so popular, in fact, that 4 board candidacies have tried to run on this. One of them being Sonny himself. On paper, it's a good idea, and the Foundation seems like the perfect legal structure to make it happen. However, after having been in the trenches trying to make it work over the past year, I'm now convinced it's a bad idea for two reasons. Short/medium term, the current structure doesn't have the necessary capacity, and longer term, there are too many risks involved if something goes wrong. Simply put, what we've experienced in the context of the STF project and a few other initiatives over the past year is the Foundation in its current form is not set up to handle projects that require significant coordination or operational capacity. There are many reasons for this: historical, personal, structural, but my takeaway after this year is there need to be major changes across many of the Foundation structures before this kind of thing is feasible. Keep in mind, the GNOME Foundation is really small. So this is the entire board, and this is all of their employees. And all of these people have their own things to do already. So adding a bunch of additional work on top of that, you know, you can see how you might run into some problems. One advantage of GNOME's current decentralized structure is its resilience. Having a small foundation at the center, which only handles infrastructure, and several independent companies and consultancies around it doing development, means different parts are insulated from each other if something goes wrong. As an example, let's take a project like Bitwarden. So the development of Bitwarden and the management of the Bitwarden project is done by the same organization. If Bitwarden, the company, just vanishes, the Bitwarden project is completely dead. Yes, there is, you know, some open source contributors, all that fun stuff, but the majority of the development is done by the people that manage it. Where in the case of the GNOME Foundation, they might manage the trademark and the infrastructure, so if that goes away, yeah, there's going to be some problems, maybe some name changes need to happen, maybe they need to go, like, to a new GitLab, to a new GitHub, host some new build infrastructure, things like that, but the project itself is fine. In the same vein, if one of the consultancies just goes bankrupt, everything else is good. Yeah, there's a couple less developers, but the entire structure doesn't fall apart. But when we are talking about the STF funding, the GNOME Foundation was basically running the show and pretty much took on that role of being the centralized place where things are done. And this is a lesson we've unfortunately had to learn the hard way when, out of the blue, Sunny was banned last year. I'm not going to talk about the ban here. I might, give me just a moment. It's for Sunny to talk about if/when he feels about it. But suffice to say that it would not have happened had we not done the STF project under the Foundation, and many community members, including myself, do not agree with the ban. What followed was, for some of us, maybe the most stressful 6 months of our lives. Since last summer, we've had to try and keep the STF project running without its main architect, while also trying to get the ban situation fixed, as well as dealing with a number of other issues caused by the ban. Thousands of volunteer hours were probably burned on this, and the issue is not even resolved yet. Who knows how many more will be burned before it's over. I'm profoundly sad thinking about the bugs we could have fixed, the patches we could have reviewed, and the features we could have designed in those hours instead. When this situation happened, I saw people who I know are big supporters of GNOME, big supporters of the GNOME Foundation, kind of lose a bit of trust in the people that were running it, because it was before seemed like this, you know, open place, you know, you knew what was happening in GNOME, and then all of a sudden, someone that was voted for was just removed from the board with nothing to say for it. Like, nothing at all. And the person who did it didn't say anything either, so, again, people just basically filled in the gaps with whatever they wanted. This is, to me, the most important takeaway, and the reason why I no longer believe the Foundation should be the structure we use to organize community development. Even if all the current operational issues are fixed, the risk of something like this happening is too great, the potential damage too severe. If this happens again, if another board member just gets deleted out of nowhere, like, at that point, I don't know why anybody would trust the GNOME Foundation. Like, if they're not willing to be transparent with the people that vote for members, like, you know, why would you trust anything else they do? So, what are the alternatives? I've talked to people in our community who feel that NGOs are fundamentally a bad structure for development projects, and that people should start more new consultancies instead. I don't fully buy that argument, but it's also not without merit in my experience. Regardless though, I think everyone has also seen at one point or another how dysfunctional corporations can be. Yeah, I think we've all seen that. My feeling is it probably also depends on the people and culture rather than just the specific legal structure. Yeah, no legal structure is going to stop incompetence. Incompetence will be incompetent no matter what you try to do to it. I don't have a perfect solution here, and I'm not sure there is one. Maybe the future is a bunch of new consulting co-ops doing a mix of grants and client work. Maybe it's new non-profits focused on development. Maybe we need to get good at Patreon. Or maybe we all just have to get a part-time job doing something else. This is most people in the development space, whether you like it or not. That's kind of just the way it's going to be. Time will tell how this all shakes out, but the realization I've come to is the current decentralized structure of the project has a lot of advantages. We should preserve this and make use of it, rather than trying to centralize everything on the foundation. You know, the GNOME Foundation might be going through some problems when even current members of the board are stepping up to say, hey, maybe doing all this development at the foundation isn't a good idea. Maybe if it leads to people getting banned from the board, maybe there's a problem there, and we don't want to see a repeat of that. But what do you think, especially if you're a member of the GNOME Foundation? I would like to know why you're still a member, and how you feel about the Sunny situation, how you feel about the Holly situation, how you feel about what's being said by Tobias here, and just generally how you feel about the Foundation in its current state. I'd love to know. So, if you like the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to LiberaPay, link in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and let's just sort things out. Something like this.